There is a moment near the end of a season 1 episode where a small boy in a yellow shirt stands in front of a crowd of people who look exactly like him, and he gives a speech, and the crowd cheers, and the music swells, and it feels like a victory. And it is a victory. The problem is that you have to look at his face. You have to actually look at it, not at the crowd around him, not at the spectacle of the moment, but at the face of the boy who caused all of this to happen. And when you do, the expression you find is not the expression of someone who has won something good. It is not relief, not satisfaction, not the ordinary warmth that crosses a person's face when something long fought for finally comes through. It is the expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a door to open, and now it has, and whatever is on the other side is exactly what he planned, and he knew all along it would be. And that certainty is not a comfort to him. It never was. Almost nobody talked about it when it first aired. The internet had a conversation about the episode, appreciated the world building, acknowledged the twist, and then moved on to the next thing. The boy in the yellow shirt was filed away as a fun subversion of the sidekick trope, a clever punchline to a mythology episode, and mostly forgotten. Tonight, we are going through all of it, so get comfortable, turn the lights down, and settle in. This is the entire story of Evil Morty, from the first second he appears on screen to the moment he does something no character in the history of the show had ever been allowed to do. We are going to take our time with it. If you haven't subscribed to Fall Asleep too, it really does help us keep making these. We'll be here a while. Before we get to Evil Morty specifically, before we talk about the eye patch, or the election, or the central finite curve, we need to spend some real time with the show that produced him. Because you cannot understand what Evil Morty represents without understanding what Rick and Morty is actually about underneath the surface. Underneath the burping and the interdimensional nonsense and the comedy that the show deploys like insulation between the audience and the thing it is genuinely trying to say. Rick and Morty premiered in late 2013 as what looked, on the surface, like a parody. The premise is a riff on the relationship between a brilliant scientist and his young companion, processed through a specific kind of science fiction irreverence. Rick Sanchez, the grandfather, is the smartest being in the universe, or at least in every universe he has yet visited. He has a portal gun that can open doorways to any dimension in the multiverse. He has a garage full of technology that would make the combined scientific output of all of human civilization look like a primary school science fair display. He speaks in a rapid, slurring cadence that could be the product of genius or the product of too many chemicals in his system, and the show is comfortable with the ambiguity between those two things. He lives with his daughter Beth and her husband Jerry and their 2 children Summer and Morty in a suburb in the American Midwest. He is drunk most of the time, or something like drunk, or something that produces the same behavioral profile as drunk without necessarily having the same cause. He drags his grandson Morty into adventures that are dangerous and often traumatic and occasionally transcendently strange and beautiful, and he does this because he needs Morty, though the nature of that need is something the show develops slowly and carefully over many seasons. The parody angle is clear enough. The show is in conversation with Back to the Future, which it has acknowledged directly. It is in conversation with Doctor Who, with every adventure scientist and young companion story the culture has produced and loved and asked no difficult questions of. Rick and Morty knows it is doing this. It announces it. The Morty character's initial function within the adventure framework is recognizably the young companion function, the civilian perspective, the person whose job is to be surprised and frightened so that the audience can be surprised and frightened along with them. And then, almost immediately, the show starts doing something different. It starts asking a question that the adventure companion genre has almost universally declined to ask. What does this do to the companion? Not in the exciting sense, not in the sense of what amazing things it exposes them to, but in the more uncomfortable sense. What does it actually do to a teenager to be pulled out of his ordinary life, repeatedly, into situations that are frightening and dangerous and that he did not choose? What does it do to him to survive those situations, and to carry the memory of them, and to go back to school on Monday? What does it cost? That question, held against the genre conventions that usually prevent it from being asked, is the engine of everything interesting that Rick and Morty does. It is the engine of the Evil Morty story specifically, because Evil Morty is the show's most complete and most sustained answer to it. Morty Smith, at the beginning of the show, is a specific and carefully drawn portrait of a particular kind of adolescent experience. He is not the heroic young companion of the genre traditions the show is riffing on. He is a boy who is failing at ordinary things, struggling at school in ways that his parents treat as worrying, awkward, and uncertain with the girl he has a crush on, perpetually existing in a family that does not quite notice him in the specific ways he needs to be noticed. His father Jerry is well-meaning and deeply mediocre and threatened by Morty's connection to Rick. His mother Beth is more capable and more absent in the emotional sense, focused outward on the strains of her marriage and her own complicated feelings about her father. His sister Summer is more socially competent and less curious and has the teenager's gift of making her own way through the world without needing to understand it. And then his grandfather comes back, or comes into his life, depending on which version of the timeline you believe, and everything changes. The adventures Rick takes Morty on are not kind. They are frequently terrifying, often traumatic, occasionally fatal in dimensions close enough to real that the horror of them registers fully. Morty watches people die on these adventures. Morty causes things to happen that he has to live with. There is a sequence in an early episode where Morty has to bury his own body, a version of himself from a parallel dimension who died so that he could keep living, and he buries it in the backyard in the middle of the night, and he does not sleep properly for weeks, and the show does not let him forget that this happened. He carries it. What is remarkable about the early seasons is that Morty knows this is happening to him. He is not naive about the cost. There are moments where he articulates it directly, where he names the damage with a clarity that is genuinely striking for a comedy series. And then he goes back. He keeps going back because Rick needs him, and because the adventures are more alive than anything else he has access to, and because he loves Rick. And the love is real and persistent and unconditional in the way that love sometimes is when you are 15 and someone makes you feel like the most important person in the room, even if the way they make you feel that is by putting you in danger. That loyalty, the quality of staying despite the cost, is Morty's defining characteristic in the show's first 2 seasons. He is forgiving in a way that borders on the unlimited. He comes back. He always comes back. And the show treats this with a complexity that lesser versions of the premise would not bother with. The loyalty is not simply admirable. It is also, from certain angles, something closer to an avoidance, a way of not dealing fully with what is being done to him by remaining in the situation rather than confronting it. The love is real, and the avoidance is real, and the show holds both of those things simultaneously without collapsing either one into the other. Evil Morty is the version of this story where the loyalty fails, where the accounting wins. He is not a different character from Morty. He is the same character taken further down the same road. The episode that introduces the Citadel of Ricks and introduces Evil Morty is the 9th episode of the first season. It is called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, and it is structured like a mystery procedural set inside the show's mythology. A Rick is being murdered. Then, another Rick. Then, more. The pattern suggests someone with access to the multiverse and a specific grudge against Ricks, or, at minimum, a specific use for dead ones. The Council of Ricks, the governing body of the Citadel, has a suspect. Rick C-137. Our Rick. The designation matters. Our Rick is the most antisocial Rick in the multiverse, the one who has refused to join the Citadel, who has declared his independence from the organization and operates entirely outside its jurisdiction. He has made no secret of his contempt for the Citadel and its pretensions to authority over versions of himself. When the murders begin, and a pattern emerges linking the targeted Ricks to Ricks who opposed or irritated the most independent and difficult Rick in the multiverse, the Council's suspect list is short. Before we go further into the plot, it is worth spending time with the Citadel itself. because the episode is establishing something important very quickly, and all of it feeds into the evil Morty story across multiple seasons. The Citadel is the governing body of the Ricks who have organized themselves across the multiverse. The premise is almost cosmically strange when you think about it. The multiverse contains infinite versions of the same person. Every possible variation of Rick Sanchez exists somewhere, in some dimension, different ages, different levels of achievement, different moral histories, different relationships with the people around them. There are Ricks who are loving fathers. There are Ricks who never left their home dimension. There are Ricks who are terrible at science. There are Ricks who died young. There are Ricks who made different choices at every significant decision point in a life that has, even in its most ordinary version, contained many significant decision points. And most of them, at some point, found a Morty. The show implies that this is not accidental. There is a reason that Ricks and Mortys end up together repeatedly across the multiverse, and the reason that the show provides, through various episodes and references, is practical rather than sentimental. Morty's brainwave frequency interferes with the scanning and tracking technology used by Rick's enemies. There are beings in the multiverse, and institutions and governments that would very much like to locate and neutralize Rick Sanchez. And the presence of a Morty nearby creates enough interference that Rick becomes harder to find. Having a Morty is camouflage. It is a functional arrangement before it is an emotional one. The Citadel has formalized this functional arrangement into a whole society. Ricks govern. Ricks lead. Ricks occupy the top of a hierarchy that they have built and maintain, and that they present as natural. Because the logic feels self-evident to them, Ricks are the smartest beings in existence. Therefore, Rick-led decisions are the best decisions. Therefore, the system where Ricks decide is the correct system. The circularity of this reasoning is not something the Citadel is interested in examining. Systems rarely are. The Mortys are not formally described as a lower class, but the texture of their existence within the Citadel is clearly marked as secondary. They are companions. Associates. Extensions of the Ricks they are assigned to. Their value is defined almost entirely in relational terms, in terms of what they provide to the Ricks they serve, and outside that relational context, their status is ambiguous at best. The show makes this uncomfortable from the first moment it is established. It does not present the hierarchy as fine, but it presents it as the way things are. And the Citadel is extremely confident in the way things are. The investigation in Close Rick Counters takes our Rick and Morty through several layers of the mystery. Rick is arrested, Morty breaks him out, they pursue the real culprit. The trail leads to a Rick who has been operating outside normal parameters, designated Evil Rick by the Citadel, who has been targeting and killing specific Ricks with a systematic efficiency that suggests something beyond simple malice. Something organized. Something that required planning. When they find Evil Rick, the confrontation is brief and the resolution is strange. Evil Rick is easier to stop than he should be. Something is off. And then the reveal, Evil Rick has not been operating independently. There is a device. A remote control of a specific and disturbing kind attached to the back of the Rick's head, feeding instructions. Someone has been using this Rick as a puppet, directing him across the multiverse, managing the whole operation from somewhere else. The Citadel, hunting a rogue Rick, has been chasing a marionette. The controller is a Morty. He is sitting in a chair in the facility where Evil Rick was operating. He has a patch over one eye. He has the composure of someone who has thought very carefully about this moment and is not surprised by how it is going. He does not look frightened. He does not look desperate. He looks, if anything, mildly interested in the last few steps of a process he has already fully modeled. The show gives him a few seconds, and in those seconds, the audience is getting its first look at something entirely new. And then, he moves. He pulls the eye patch off. He walks into the crowd of other Mortys who are being held in the facility, prisoners of Evil Rick's operation, and he becomes indistinguishable. One Morty among many. Same yellow shirt, same face, same approximate size. The patchy one is gone before anyone thinks to look for him in the crowd. because a crowd of Mortis is not something the Ricks look at carefully. That is the point. The efficiency of it is the most chilling thing about the scene on a rewatch. He had the exit planned before the entrance. The crowd of other Mortis was not incidental to his operation. It was part of the architecture. He positioned them as his escape route. He knew that a Rick-controlled facility would produce exactly this kind of prisoner population. And he knew that a Rick-controlled institution would not scrutinize that population carefully, because Mortys are not something Ricks scrutinize carefully. He built his disappearing act out of the Citadel's own contempt. The episode ends. The show moves forward into the next story, and then the next one, and the Citadel is not revisited as a location for some time. The boy with the eye patch is not mentioned. His name, which the internet eventually settled on as Evil Morty, though the show did not use that name immediately, does not enter the dialogue. What remains, for the audience members paying close attention, is a constellation of unanswered questions. Who is this Morty? Where did he come from? What does he want? The operation he ran was sophisticated and sustained. He acquired a Rick, attached a remote control device, directed a campaign of targeted murders across the multiverse, managed to avoid detection for long enough to accomplish whatever he was trying to accomplish, and then escaped into a crowd and vanished. This is not the work of a Morty who is a sidekick. This is not the work of a Morty who does not count. This is the work of someone who has spent a significant amount of time and intelligence on a project. What was the project? The show does not say. It plants the question and walks away from it, which is one of the things Rick and Morty does extremely well. It trusts its audience to remember, to keep carrying the question, to bring it forward into the next set of episodes and the one after that. Season 2 arrives, and it is a deeper and darker season in almost every dimension. The multiverse mythology expands in directions the first season only gestured at. The Galactic Federation, mentioned obliquely in Season 1, becomes a more present and more threatening force. Rick's history is explored with more precision and more honesty. The season deepens the portrait of the Smith-Sanchez family in ways that make it harder to simply enjoy the adventures without thinking about what they cost the people having them. There is an episode in Season 2 called Morty Night Run, in which Morty makes a moral decision, a genuine and costly moral decision, and Rick barely notices. Not because Rick does not care about Morty, but because Rick operates at a frequency of moral consideration that moves too quickly and at too high a level of abstraction to always register the specific human cost in front of him. He is not indifferent. He is simply not calibrated for it. The effect, from Morty's perspective, is indistinguishable from indifference, and the show knows this and lets the camera rest on Morty's face afterward long enough for you to feel it. There is an episode called Autoerotic Assimilation, which is about Rick's ex-partner, Unity, and which ends with a sequence of Rick's attempted suicide that is presented with a bleakness that no amount of subsequent comedy entirely dispels. The show is showing you the inside of Rick's emotional life, the place where all the intelligence and all the capability and all the experience has deposited. It is a very dark place. The show does not look away, and there is material across Season 2, accumulating episode by episode, that deepens the portrait of what the Rick-Morty relationship actually is, what it takes from Morty, what it gives him, the ways in which the giving and the taking are intertwined in a knot that Morty cannot easily separate, because the same force that does the taking, Rick's genius and recklessness and need, also does the giving, the aliveness and the reality and the sense of mattering that the adventures provide. This is the emotional landscape that Evil Morty was gestating in during the gap between his first appearance and his return. The show was building the weight that his eventual return would need to carry. It was making sure the audience understood, in their bones, what the relationship costs, so that when the show presents a version of Morty who has done the full accounting, the audience would recognize the arithmetic. Season 3 opens with the Rickshank Redemption, which is the most Rick-centered season premiere the show had produced. The episode involves Rick escaping from a Galactic Federation prison through a sequence of nested deception so elaborate that the audience cannot be entirely certain, until the final minutes, which parts of it were real and which were performance. It involves Rick dismantling the Galactic Federation's entire economic system, essentially as a side effect of his escape. And it involves the destruction of the Council of Ricks. The mechanism by which the Council is destroyed is worth understanding. Rick manipulates the Council into a situation where their own aggressive response to him becomes the thing that ends them. He uses their certainty against them. He anticipates how they will respond, because he is a Rick, and they are Ricks, and the response is predictable. Because Ricks are predictable in specific ways that other Ricks know how to exploit. The Citadel loses its governing body. A power vacuum is created. And into that vacuum, the show's second episode of Season 3, Tales from the Citadel, is dropped. This episode is one of the most structurally ambitious pieces of television the show has produced. It abandons our Rick and Morty entirely. They do not appear. The episode is set inside the Citadel as it attempts to reconstitute itself in the absence of the Council, and it follows a set of original characters, none of whom we have met before, across several interwoven storylines that each illuminate a different layer of the Citadel's social and economic structure. The first storyline follows a Rick who serves as a Citadel police officer, partnered with a Morty. This storyline is about the law enforcement apparatus of the Citadel, specifically about how that apparatus functions as a mechanism for maintaining the existing hierarchy rather than serving any universal notion of justice. Cop Rick is a true believer in the system. He has internalized the Citadel's values. He does his job, and he is, within the system's own terms, competent and loyal. His Morty partner sees more clearly. He has developed a perspective on what the policing actually does and who it actually serves, and that perspective is not comfortable for him to hold within the institutional context he inhabits. The tension between them is the tension between the person who serves the system and the person who has begun to see through it. The second storyline follows a factory Morty, a Morty who works on what appears to be a production floor within the Citadel's economic infrastructure, doing repetitive work for wages that position him firmly in the lower tier of the Citadel's economic hierarchy. He has plans. He is saving money. He has a vision of his own future that does not involve the factory. A future in which he is more than a function of the production process. A future that belongs to him rather than to the enterprise he serves. His storyline is the show asking whether the Citadel actually allows the kind of mobility it implies. Whether the legitimate channels are real channels or decorative ones. Whether the system is designed for Mortis to rise through it, or whether it is designed for Mortis to believe they might rise through it. Which is a different thing entirely. The third storyline follows a Morty who has in fact risen within the Citadel's economy. A businessman Morty who operates in the upper tiers of the social structure, who has achieved the kind of material success that the factory Morty is working toward. His storyline is about what it costs to get there, about what a Morty has to become, or pretend to be, or agree to, in order to succeed in a system that was not designed with Mortys in mind, about whether the success is real or whether it is a performance of success that requires constant maintenance because the system could withdraw its validation at any moment. His storyline is the darker mirror of the factory Morty's aspiration. The fourth storyline is the quietest and, in some ways, the most devastating. It follows a Rick who has been so thoroughly broken by the cumulative experience of being Rick, the intelligence that sees too much and the adventures that expose too much, and the specific kind of existential horror that comes from knowing that reality is more vast and more indifferent than any being should have to know. That he is essentially withdrawn from functional life. He is no longer adventuring. He is no longer governing. He is existing in a kind of damaged suspension. A Rick who has arrived at the logical terminus of the journey that Rick is on, and the terminal station is very bleak. His storyline functions as a warning, a picture of where this all goes. All of these stories move toward the same event. The election. The Citadel, reconstituting its governance after the Council's destruction, has adopted a democratic mechanism for selecting leadership. It is presenting this as a new era, as the beginning of something more equitable. The election is, in the show's framing, a performance of legitimacy that the Citadel needs in order to function. And the performance is sincerely believed by many of its participants, which is what makes it function as a performance. Several candidates address the crowd. A worker Morty gives a speech about Morty representation, about the Citadel acknowledging the population it has excluded from governance. A lawyer Rick argues for stability and continuity, for the kind of experienced leadership that understands how the system works and can keep it running. The speeches are recognizably political, which is to say they are recognizably a mixture of sincere belief and strategic framing, the way that political speeches always are, the way that the most effective political speeches always have to be. And then, Evil Morty takes the stage. He is older, not dramatically so, not in years necessarily, but in some quality of presence that the animation captures without naming. There is an efficiency to how he moves. The eye patch is back, small and deliberate, sitting on his face like a detail that has decided it belongs there. He stands at the podium and he speaks to the crowd, and what he says deserves careful attention, because the show has written it with unusual precision. He does not make promises that sound impossible. He does not perform warmth he does not have. He does not give the crowd the speech it wants, not entirely, because giving the crowd exactly the speech it wants is a form of lying that the crowd can usually sense even when they cannot name it. He speaks about the Ricks, about the structure, about what it has meant for every Morty in the Citadel to define themselves through their relationship to a Rick, to have their entire identity constructed as a function of someone else's genius. He speaks about this as a political fact, as a structural reality that has a history and a logic and a flaw, and he speaks about the flaw without drama, without performed outrage, with the flat certainty of someone who has thought about this until the thinking is done and the conclusions are the conclusions. He is right about what he is describing. This is the thing that the show insists on and that cannot be softened. The Citadel has run on a logic that is genuinely unjust. The subordination of Mortis is not a minor inconvenience or a slight imbalance. It is systematic. It is enforced. It has produced the factory Morty situation, and the businessman Morty situation, and the cop Morty situation, and an infinite number of other situations across the Citadel's jurisdiction, and in all of them, the Morty's value is defined in terms of a Rick's needs, and the Morty's existence is shaped by a framework the Morty did not design and was never asked about. Evil Morty has identified this correctly. He has named it clearly. And the crowd responds to it the way crowds respond to accurate diagnoses of their situation, with relief and recognition and the kind of energy that comes from hearing something true said out loud in a context where it has usually been suppressed. The election happens. The votes are counted. Evil Morty wins by a margin that the show does not specify, but that is clearly decisive. He is the first Morty to be elected president of the Citadel of Ricks. The crowd goes wild. The moment feels like something significant, because it is something significant. And then the final image of the episode arrives, and the significance shifts. The staffers. In the president's office. On trolley, their eyes removed. Disposed of, quietly and efficiently, by a president who has already decided what the job is for. The victory, 30 seconds after it happened, looks exactly like what it always was going to be. There is a question that the show raises and does not answer cleanly, and it is the most important question the episode leaves behind. What is the presidency for? What is Evil Morty actually doing with the power the Citadel has given him? Surface answer, the one the show offers through the staffers scene, is that the presidency is a resource, a base of operations, a way of accessing the Citadel's finances and technology and political infrastructure and using them toward a goal that the campaign speech implied was about Morty liberation, but that turns out to be about something else entirely. Evil Morty is not going to liberate the Mortys of the Citadel. He is going to use the Citadel, which includes the Mortys within it, as a tool toward a larger objective. The show builds this conclusion gradually, through implication rather than direct statement. The Citadel under Evil Morty's governance continues to function in ways that suggest the social hierarchy has not been fundamentally changed. The Mortys who voted for him are not freer than they were before the election. The Ricks who held power before the election have had their power redistributed rather than abolished. The new arrangements serve the presidency rather than the population, and the presidency serves a purpose that remains, for several episodes worth of time, opaque. This is where the show's analysis of ideology is most precise. Evil Morty is not a hypocrite in the simple sense of believing one thing and doing another. He appears to genuinely believe that the Citadel's structure is unjust. He is not wrong about that belief. The problem is that his commitment to dismantling the injustice does not extend to the specific beings who suffer from it. He cares about the concept. He does not appear to care, in any personalized way, about the actual Mortis whose situation he described so accurately in his campaign speech. They were instruments of the political project. Now the political project has moved to its next phase, and the Mortys, like the Ricks before them, are instruments of that phase. The logic has not changed. The person at the top of it has. This is the specific shape of the moral failure the show is examining through Evil Morty. Not the failure of someone who wanted power and lied about their motives. Something more nuanced and more disturbing than that. The failure of someone who identified a real injustice correctly and then, in the process of addressing it, reproduced the logic of the injustice in a new configuration. The liberator who becomes the thing they fought. Not because they were secretly corrupt all along, but because the tools they used to fight the old structure were the old structure's tools, and tools shape what you can build with them. The origin question is the shadow that falls across everything. The question of what happened to make this Morty what he is. The show provides fragments. In the Season 1 episode, during the unwinding of Evil Rick's operation, there are brief images, quick cuts, flashes that register as something like recovered memory or surveillance footage, showing a Morty in a situation that is clearly painful and clearly not an adventure in the standard sense. The images are violent and the context is unclear. But they establish one thing unambiguously. Whatever Evil Morty's history is, it contains experiences that the show is treating as formative in the darkest sense. It contains things that were done to him. Not accidents he survived, but things that happened because of a relationship that should have protected him from them. The fan community has spent years building around this fragment, and the theory that has received the most sustained attention and the most evidence-based support is the theory that Evil Morty is the original Morty. The Morty who was Rick's companion before the Rick and Morty the show follows came to exist as a pair. The theory runs like this. Rick C137, our Rick, did not always live with Beth's family. He was absent for most of Beth's life. When he came back, or came into the family's life in the specific configuration the show follows, he was already the person he is, formed by experiences that the show only reveals in fragments across multiple seasons. Before he came back, before this Morty, there was a previous version of the same arrangement. Rick and a Morty, somewhere, in some configuration. And that arrangement ended. The theory proposes that the ending was the kind of ending that produces Evil Morty. That something happened between that Rick and that Morty, in whatever adventures they went on together, that crossed a line that the love between them could not survive. Or that the Rick walked away, as Ricks apparently do, moved on to another dimension, another configuration, another Morty, leaving the original behind. And the original, instead of falling apart, thought about what had been done to him. Thought about it for a long time. Became someone who had a plan. The show has structured its hints in ways that reward this reading without confirming it. The most notable hint is in the early seasons, in the visual language around Rick's past, and specifically in the implications around what Rick was before he came to live with Beth's family. The show implies, without stating, that Rick has had more than one Morty. That the Rick-Morty dynamic is not a one-time occurrence in Rick's life, but a recurring pattern. And if it is a recurring pattern, then there were previous Mortis, and those Mortys are somewhere, and what they became after their Rick moved on is an open question. Evil Morty is, in this reading, the answer to that open question. He is what a Morty becomes when the Rick leaves and the Morty is left holding everything the adventures deposited in him, the damage and the knowledge and the skills and the specific understanding of how Rick level intelligence operates, without the ongoing relationship to organize it around. He takes what the adventures gave him, and he does something with it. Something Rick would recognize. Which is why, in the Season 5 finale, Rick's expression when he sees what Evil Morty has built is not surprise. This must be said again, clearly, this is a fan theory. It is the best fan theory the show has generated, the one most coherently supported by the available evidence, the one the show has consistently fed material into without ever confirming. It should be treated as theory, not as canon. The show has not confirmed it. What is confirmed, through the structure and implications of the show across multiple seasons, is the emotional logic. Whatever happened to Evil Morty, the result is someone who has processed the full cost of the Rick-Morty dynamic and arrived at a set of conclusions that the Morty we follow has not arrived at yet, or has arrived at and then retreated from, or keeps arriving at in moments of clarity and then backs away from because the love is stronger than the accounting. Evil Morty's love, whatever it was, is no longer stronger than the accounting. Or if it is buried so far down that it does not surface. The question of what it feels like to be Evil Morty is one the show approaches through behavior rather than interiority. We do not get his inner life narrated. We do not get a confession scene or a breakdown scene or any of the dramatic conventions that typically allow a character to explain themselves from the inside. We get what he does and how he does it, and the how is very informative. The dominant quality of Evil Morty across all of his appearances is stillness. Not the stillness of inaction, but the stillness of someone who has decided where they are going and is moving in that direction at exactly the pace they have chosen. He is, in a show defined by frenetic and often chaotic energy, almost completely still. He does not rush. He does not raise his voice. He does not display the agitation or urgency that characterizes most of the other significant figures in the show when their plans are under pressure. This stillness is, in the register of the show's visual language, a Rick quality. Rick is many things, and he presents as many things. But what the show reveals over multiple seasons is that underneath the performance of chaos, there is a strategic intelligence that moves at its own pace and in its own direction. The burping and the stumbling and the apparent disorganization are in many episodes revealed to be surface noise rather than an accurate picture of the mind producing them. Rick is very controlled where it counts. Evil Morty has that quality without the performance. He is not using chaos as camouflage for his real operations. He is not hiding his intelligence behind affect. He is simply what he is. A strategic intelligence operating with complete visibility, and if that visibility makes you uncomfortable, he is not adjusting to manage your comfort. The show's restraint in not giving us his internal experience is matched by its restraint in not giving us his origin explicitly. Both of these restraints are correct choices. To explain Evil Morty is to diminish him. The character works because of what the show withholds. The mystery of his history is load-bearing. The opacity of his interior life is load-bearing. Remove either one, and the character becomes ordinary, becomes the kind of villain you can process and move past, rather than the kind of figure who stays with you, because you can never be entirely sure you understand him. The Season 5 finale is the episode that changes everything, and it changes it by revealing an architecture that was invisible until the moment it was named. The episode is the Season 5 finale, and it brings Evil Morty back to the center of the story, and the thing he has been building toward is the central finite curve. The central finite curve. The name is introduced in this episode, and it reframes everything that has preceded it, not just in Evil Morty's story, but in the entire history of the show. Because the curve is not a minor detail of the multiverse mythology. It is the foundation of everything. Here is what the curve is. The multiverse is genuinely infinite. Among the infinite dimensions it contains are every possible configuration of reality, including realities that are nothing like the ones the show has visited, including realities where the rules of physics are different, or where humanity never existed, or where the dominant intelligence is something no human being would recognize as intelligence. Infinite possibilities, infinite variations. The Citadel of Ricks does not operate in the infinite multiverse. It operates in a curated subset of the multiverse, specifically the subset of dimensions in which Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in existence. Not the smartest person in the room, not the smartest species on the planet, but the actual supreme intelligence of the entire reality. The curve is the wall the Citadel built around that subset. Everything inside the curve is a dimension where Rick wins. Everything outside the curve is the rest of infinity. Let the implications of this sink in, because they are substantial. Every adventure Rick and Morty have ever had has been within the curve. Every dimension they have visited, every threat they have faced. Every moment in which Rick's genius has been the thing that saved them, or could save them, or might have saved them if he had applied it in time, has occurred within a section of the multiverse that was selected specifically because Rick wins there. Rick's supremacy, the foundational assumption of his identity and his self-image and his entire approach to existence, is not a fact of reality. It is a product of the filter. He has been the smartest being in his accessible universe because his accessible universe was built to confirm that he is the smartest being in it. The curve is a tautology given physical form. It is the Citadel's self-justification made architectural. The system was built on the premise that Rick is supreme. The system selects for dimensions where that is true. The dimensions selected confirm the premise. The confirmation justifies the system. The circularity is perfect. It is the most elaborate and most complete version of the self-reinforcing assumption the show has been examining from its first episode. And Evil Morty has figured this out. From his position as the most disenfranchised figure in the most powerful institution inside the curve, he has identified the walls of the cage, he has found the mechanism, and he has spent years, possibly decades, accumulating the resources necessary to break it. The breach itself. The moment in the Season 5 finale when Evil Morty activates whatever he has built with the Citadel's resources and the curve is torn open, is presented with the kind of visual scale that the show reserves for its most significant events. The Citadel begins to come apart. The structure that maintained the boundary between the curated multiverse and the infinite one outside cannot survive the breach. It is catastrophically undone. And Evil Morty walks through the opening. He walks toward a space that is, from the perspective of everyone who has spent their existence inside the curve, entirely unknown. A multiverse where there is no guarantee that Rick is the smartest being around. A multiverse where Rick's supremacy is not built into the architecture. A multiverse that is simply the multiverse. Unrestricted and unselected and as indifferent to Rick Sanchez as it is to everyone else. Rick is present in this episode, trying to understand what is happening and to do something about it, and the show gives him a moment of recognition that is one of the most precisely calibrated emotional beats in the series. He understands what the curve is. He understands what Evil Morty is doing, and the expression that crosses his face is not the expression of a man who has discovered something unexpected. It is the expression of a man who has known something for a long time, and who has chosen, for reasons that are complicated and cannot be fully articulated in the moment, to stay. To live inside the cage. To keep being the smartest person in the room, even knowing that the room was selected to ensure that. Evil Morty does not address this directly. He does not deliver the confrontation speech to Rick that a lesser version of the story would have written for him. He has said what he needs to say through his actions, through the entire arc of what he has done, and additional words would diminish it. He leaves. The curve comes down. The wider multiverse opens. The music. I want to talk about the music at length, because the show has been deliberate about its musical choices throughout its run, and the choice made for Evil Morty's exit is the most deliberate and most meaningful of all of them. Rick and Morty has a complicated musical identity. It uses a composed score for moment-to-moment emotional calibration. It uses carefully selected licensed music for scenes where the emotional register needs a specific kind of cultural resonance, the kind that comes from music you already have a relationship with being placed in a new context. And it has, on specific occasions, used one piece in particular, a piece that has become associated with the show's most emotionally raw and most honest moments. The piece is For the Damaged Coda by the band Blonde Redhead. It is a piece of music with a particular quality, quiet and fractured and relentless, that sounds less like a song and more like an emotional state given duration. It sounds like something that cannot be repaired. It sounds like the moment after the decision that cannot be undone. The show used it significantly and memorably in the Season 2 finale, during the sequence in which Rick turns himself in to the Galactic Federation in order to protect his family. He gives up his freedom, his autonomy, his entire project of living outside every system that presumes to govern him, in order to keep the people he loves safe. He makes this decision without making a speech about it, without performing the sacrifice, simply doing it and letting the music carry what his face cannot say. The music plays over his walk into custody. It sounds like everything it should sound like in that moment. It sounds like love and defeat, like a choice that is freely made and costs everything, like the end of something. The show uses the same piece of music for Evil Morty's exit. Think about what this choice means. The show has reserved this piece for its most emotionally significant moments. It has deployed it once in one of the most discussed and most beloved sequences it has produced, and it has associated it, irrevocably, with Rick's interior life, with the Rick who is buried under all the armor, who loves his family and will sacrifice himself for them, and who almost never lets any of that be visible. That music belongs to Rick. And the show plays it for Evil Morty walking through the hole in the curve, alone, into the wider dark. The meaning of this cannot be accidental and cannot be understated. The show is saying, in the most direct terms it has available without using words, that whatever Evil Morty is experiencing in this moment belongs in the same emotional register as what Rick was experiencing in that Season 2 moment. That the two exits, the one toward sacrifice and the one toward freedom, are the same kind of exit. That they cost the same thing. That underneath the different surfaces, the different choices, the different lives, there is the same wound, the same architecture of damage, the same unbearable knowledge about what love does to you and what you do to protect yourself from it. They are the same person. The music says so. The show does not need to say anything else. The parallel between Evil Morty and Rick is not just a thematic observation. It is the structural spine of the entire Evil Morty arc, the thing that makes it more than a villain subplot and makes it a genuine interrogation of the show's own central premise. Rick is the character the show built itself around, his intelligence, his damage, his love, his self-destruction. The question of whether someone who has armored this completely can still be reached. These are the questions that animate the show at its most serious. And those questions have, across multiple seasons, been examined from the outside, from the perspective of the people around Rick who care about him, and are confused by him and damaged by him, and who cannot make him be what they need him to be. Evil Morty is the show examining those questions from the inside, from the perspective of what it actually produces when you take someone with Rick-level intelligence and Rick-level damage and remove the love that, in Rick's case, has kept him tethered to the world. Rick has Beth. Rick has Summer. Rick has Morty. However badly he manages those relationships, however much damage he does in the course of maintaining them, they are the thing that keeps him in the game. They are the reason he keeps coming back. The attachments, genuine and costly and imperfectly expressed as they are what separate Rick's nihilism from its logical conclusion. Evil Morty does not have attachments, or rather, he had them, and they failed, and he decided in the aftermath of that failure that the attachments themselves were the problem. That the love was the mechanism by which he was controlled. Not consciously, not as a deliberate strategy of control on the Rick's part, perhaps, but functionally. In the sense that his love for Rick was the thing that kept him in a situation that was damaging him. He loved his Rick, and that love made him stay. And when the staying ended, one way or another, he arrived at a conclusion that Rick has approached, but never quite reached, that the love is not worth the cost. This is the place the show has been building to, almost since the beginning, the place where the Rick-Morty dynamic's most dangerous possibility lies. The possibility that the relationship, for all its genuine warmth and its genuine importance to both parties, is doing something to Morty that ought not to be done. That the accounting does not balance. That the correct response to an honest assessment of what the relationship costs is to leave it. The show does not endorse this conclusion. It does not present Evil Morty's exit as the right answer, but it presents it as a comprehensible answer, which is more disturbing than either endorsement or simple condemnation would be. It shows you how someone gets there. It shows you every step. And it lets the music play over the departure without telling you how to feel about what you are watching. The fan response to Evil Morty across the years between his first appearance and his Season 5 exit is worth considering, because it tells us something important about what the character touched in the audience that other figures in the show's mythology had not quite reached. Rick and Morty has a large and analytically inclined fan community. The show's most dedicated viewers notice details, track continuity across seasons, and build interpretive frameworks around the mythology with a seriousness that the show, to its credit, usually rewards. The community had been watching Evil Morty carefully since Season 1, building theories, tracking implications, debating readings. The volume and depth of fan engagement with Evil Morty is, across the show's run, significantly greater than for most other supporting or recurring characters, including characters who appear in many more episodes. The analysis of his political speech, the origin theories, the debates about whether he represents liberation or tyranny or some third category that does not fit either cleanly, accumulated continuously across the gap years and continued to accumulate after the Season 5 finale provided new material to work with. The reason is not simply that he is well written, though he is. The reason is that he represents a position the audience had been primed to receive. The show, across multiple seasons, had been making the Rick-Morty dynamic uncomfortable in ways that built without resolving. Had been showing the cost to Morty of the relationship without giving Morty a framework for processing or addressing that cost. Had been putting the audience in the position of caring about Morty and also seeing clearly what caring about Rick does to him. Evil Morty is the show's acknowledgement of that discomfort. He is the character who does what a part of the audience, the part that has been doing the accounting alongside the show, has been thinking about. He leaves. He does something about it. He is not the version of the story where Morty processes his feelings in a therapy session and comes to a healthy understanding of the relationship's dynamics. He is the version where the accounting wins, and what follows from that is not healing, but war. The audience recognized this. Some of them wanted to celebrate it. Some of them were disturbed by it. Some of them were both simultaneously, which is probably the correct response to a character who is this precisely positioned in the moral landscape of the show. He is right about the injustice. He is terrifying in his methods. Both of those things are true at the same time, and neither of them cancels the other. After the Season 5 finale, after the curve comes down and Evil Morty walks through the breach, the story enters a phase that has not yet been fully told. He is outside. He is in the wider multiverse, the infinite one, the one where the guarantee of Rick's supremacy does not apply. He is alone in a space that none of the show's characters have been in before, operating without the scaffolding of the Citadel or any other institutional structure, having burned every bridge behind him. What happens next is, as of the material the show has produced through its later seasons, still being developed. The show has taken the aftermath of the Curve's destruction seriously, allowing it to affect the texture of the adventures and the mythology in ways that have not yet been fully played out. The wider multiverse is present as a context even when it is not the explicit subject. The implications for Rick are the most visible. Rick now operates in a multiverse where he might encounter beings who are his equal or better, where the certainty that has always been available to him, the the certainty that he is the most capable entity in any given situation is no longer architecturally guaranteed. He has lost the floor. What that costs him, how it changes his relationship to the adventures and to the people around him. The show is still exploring. The implications for Evil Morty himself are more opaque, because the show has not yet returned to him directly in the later seasons. What he does in the wide multiverse, what project replaces the project of destroying the curve now that the curve is gone, whether he finds something in the wider infinity that the curated universe could not offer him. Whether the freedom he achieved feels like freedom, these questions are sitting open. The silence of those open questions is, in its own way, the most interesting thing about his story at this point. He is out there. He is somewhere in the infinite. He is doing something. And we do not know what it is. That uncertainty, in a show that has spent its entire run demonstrating that certainty is the most dangerous thing an intelligent being can indulge in, is exactly right. There is something the show has consistently refused to do with Evil Morty, and the refusal deserves its own attention because it is the thing that elevates the character above the level of a very well constructed antagonist into something genuinely unusual in television fiction. The show has refused to make him pitiable in the conventional sense. It has not given him a scene where he breaks down. It has not delivered the moment of vulnerability that drama typically offers when it wants the audience to feel the wound underneath the armor. There is no scene where Evil Morty's history is confessed, no moment where the mask slips and you see the 15-year-old who was damaged by the adventure, no speech where he explains himself in terms that would allow the audience to file him under sympathetic villain and proceed. The show withholds this. And the withholding is a choice that I find deeply respectful, both of the character and of the audience. What the show is declining to do is use Evil Morty's potential pain as entertainment. It is declining to produce the breakdown scene because the breakdown scene would, in this context, be a kind of exploitation. It would be taking the history that produced him, which is already being implied as something genuinely terrible, and converting it into a dramatic moment for the audience to feel things about. It would be making his wound legible and accessible and emotionally satisfying in the way that well-executed dramatic revelations are emotionally satisfying. Evil Morty's wound, if he has one, is not offered as spectacle. The show treats the privacy of his interior as something that belongs to him. We do not get to see it. And in this, perversely, the show is doing more for the character than a full emotional exposition would do. By not showing us what he feels, the show preserves the mystery. By not giving us the breakdown scene, the show refuses to resolve him into something we can process and put away. He remains present. He remains unanswered. He is still there in the wider multiverse, doing something, being something, and we do not know what. That not knowing is the show keeping faith with the character it built. Rick and Morty has been on the air for more than a decade. It has gone through periods of being the most discussed show on the internet and periods of relative quiet. It has survived the loss of one of its co-creators from the production process and continued to develop its mythology under a different configuration of creative leadership. It has produced episodes that are among the best television the animation medium has generated, and episodes that were more ordinary, and the mythology has continued to accumulate through all of it. The Evil Morty arc is, I believe, the thing the show will be most remembered for when the longer view is finally available. Not because it is the funniest part of the show, not because it is the most technically spectacular, but because it is the most honest. Because it takes the central relationship of the show and follows it to its most uncomfortable and most truthful conclusion without flinching and without the safety net of a moral lesson. It shows you where the story goes when the Morty is smart enough and damaged enough and has been patient enough to do something about what he knows. The arc took 4.5 seasons to build to its season 5 climax. It required the audience to remember a character introduced briefly in season 1 and to carry that memory forward through long gaps. It required the show to develop the Rick-Morty dynamic with enough complexity that the Evil Morty reading of that dynamic would land as something earned rather than grafted on. It required, in other words, a kind of trust in the audience and a kind of patience in the storytelling that expensive prestige television increasingly declines to practice. The show practiced it. The show trusted. The build-up paid off in a finale that reframed not just the evil Morty story, but the entire mythology the show had been building, and did so with an economy and a precision that felt inevitable in retrospect, which is the signature of great structural writing. The best-laid narrative architecture always looks obvious once you see it. The skill is in making sure you do not see it until exactly the right moment. So, what is the whole thing about? What is the evil Morty story, taken from beginning to end, actually saying? It is saying something about what it costs to be the small person in a partnership defined by someone else's greatness. What accumulates in you over years of being the buffer, the liability, the one whose feelings are less important because your usefulness is less obvious, the one who is loved but not seen, protected but not respected, necessary but never central. What that does to a person over time, when the person is intelligent enough to understand exactly what is being done to them and why and in what configuration. And it is saying that the response to that accumulation, the response of intelligence applied to injustice without the moderating influence of ongoing love, is not healing, and it is not freedom in any simple sense, and it is not villainous in any simple sense either. It is something harder than any of those categories. It is comprehensible. You can sit with the story from the beginning to the end and follow every step. You can see how someone gets there. You can understand the logic of every decision, even the decisions that lead somewhere terrible. The show does not ask you to approve. It does not offer a verdict. It shows you a person who was produced by specific conditions, who made specific choices in response to those conditions, who achieved what he set out to achieve, and who walked through a door into a space that has not been explored, and let the door close behind him. And it plays music over the departure that tells you, without words, that whatever you thought you were watching, you were also watching something that rhymes with loss. The boy with the eye patch is out there somewhere. The curve is gone. The wider multiverse is open. And the story, the full story, the story that includes where he goes and what he does, and whether the wide open nothing on the other side of the wall turns out to be better than the curated cage he destroyed, is still being written. These are the kinds of questions that do not have clean answers. The show knows this. Evil Morty knows this. And maybe that is the most honest thing the show has said about intelligence and damage and the long aftermath of love, that knowing the full truth about your situation does not guarantee that you do something good with it. It only guarantees that you do something. The architecture of the Rick and Morty multiverse is worth dwelling on longer than the show's pace usually allows, because it is the environment in which Evil Morty was formed, and it is the environment he dismantled, and understanding it in detail changes the shape of everything he did. The show gives you the multiverse in pieces, across many episodes and many seasons, and the picture assembles slowly if you are paying attention and not at all if you are not. But the picture is coherent, and the coherence is important. Every dimension in the Rick and Morty multiverse is simultaneously unique and part of an infinite set of variations. The dimension our Rick and Morty come from, designated C137 in the Citadel's taxonomy, is one among an uncountable number of others, most of which differ from it in ways that range from trivially small to cosmically large. In some dimensions, the same characters made slightly different choices at a critical moment, and everything diverged from there. In others, the divergence happened before any of the characters were born, or before humans existed, or before the planet formed. The multiverse is not a collection of near misses on a single narrative. It is infinite possibility made concrete. What this means for the show's characters, and specifically for the Ricks and the Mortys who inhabit this multiverse, is that identity is a strange and contested concept. Rick C137 is not the only Rick. He is not the original Rick, not the best Rick, not the Rick who matters more than the others. He is one version among infinite versions, distinguished from the others by the specific accumulation of choices and accidents that have made him who he is, but not distinguished by any intrinsic quality of uniqueness. Somewhere in the multiverse, there is a Rick who made every choice our Rick made, but in a slightly different order. There is a Rick who made all the same choices and is objectively smarter. There is a Rick who is, by any measurable criterion, identical to our Rick in every way that can be measured. This is philosophically destabilizing in a way the show leans into rather than away from. The episodes that engage with the multiverse most directly are often the episodes that are also the most interested in what identity means when you are one of infinite copies of yourself. When your life is unique only in the sense that all lives are unique, not in the sense of being singular or irreplaceable in any cosmic framework. Rick handles this destabilization through the familiar armor of not caring about it, or performing not caring about it so thoroughly that the performance and the reality become indistinguishable. Other Ricks handle it differently, and the Mortys who inhabit these dimensions have the same problem in a more acute form, because a Morty has all the identity fragility of the multiverse condition without the genius that at least provides a functional response to it. A Rick can say, "I am the smartest being in the room," and that is something that is a quality of distinction that cuts through the infinite sameness. A Morty cannot make that claim. A Morty is, in the terms the show has established, unremarkable, average in the dimensions that the Citadel values, valuable only instrumentally, one among infinite interchangeable others. Evil Morty understood this. He understood it from the inside, from the position of having been a Morty, and he understood the specific cruelty of it, the way it makes self-worth structurally difficult when your entire existence is organized around confirming someone else's self-worth. And the thing he did with that understanding was to find the mechanism that produced it, to trace the belief that Mortys are unremarkable back to the system that kept insisting it was true, to ask whether the system was correctly measuring something real, or whether it was producing a self-confirming reality through the act of selection and exclusion. The answer he found was the curve. There is a version of the story in which Evil Morty is a straightforward class revolutionary, in which the injustice of the Citadel's hierarchy is the grievance, the Morty underclass is the constituency, and the project is liberation in a relatively conventional sense. The show flirts with this reading and then declines it, and the declining is where things get interesting. The class reading does not fully account for Evil Morty because it does not account for his relationship to the Mortys he claims to represent. A genuine class revolutionary has solidarity with the class they fight for. They care about the actual people in it, not just the category. They are moved by the specific suffering of specific individuals in ways that shape the project, that impose constraints on what can be done in the project's name. Evil Morty is not moved in this way. The Mortys he addressed in his campaign speech are not, as far as the show demonstrates, more free or more empowered or more seen under his presidency than they were before. What has changed is who manages the structure of their subordination. The structure itself remains. The Citadel is still the Citadel. The hierarchy is still the hierarchy. The change is at the very top, where a Morty now sits instead of a Rick, and that change is real and symbolically significant and practically insufficient to constitute the liberation that the speech implied. This is not a hypocrisy reading. It is something more nuanced. Evil Morty's project was never primarily about Morty liberation, even when the language of Morty liberation was the tool he used to achieve the steps of the project. He identified an injustice correctly, and used that correct identification politically, and then did not allow the political momentum to constrain the actual project, which was the curve and then the breach. The Mortys were means. The liberation of the curve was the end. And whether the liberation of the curve constitutes something that benefits the Mortys of the Citadel is not a question Evil Morty appears to have been primarily interested in answering. What the curve's destruction does for the general population of Ricks and Mortys in the multiverse is an indirect effect of something he did for his own reasons. This is not to say those reasons are wrong. The curve's destruction, as the show presents it, is the most significant act anyone has performed in the multiverse in the show's history. It opens possibilities that were previously foreclosed. It changes the structure of reality as the characters have experienced it. It is genuinely a liberation of a kind, even if it was not performed with liberation as its primary motive. But the distinction matters, and the show marks it carefully. Evil Morty is not the hero of the Morty underclass. He is a Morty who used the Morty underclass and who happened, in the process of doing something for his own reasons, to do something that had broader consequences. The show does not conflate these things. It holds them apart, and the gap between them is where the character's moral complexity lives. The question of whether Rick knew about the curve before Evil Morty revealed and destroyed it is one the show raises without resolving, and the raising is more interesting than any resolution would be. Rick is the smartest being in his accessible multiverse. He has been exploring dimensions and mapping their properties for longer than most beings in the show have been alive. He has built technology that can navigate the multiverse at will. He has operated within the Citadel's jurisdiction even while refusing the Citadel's authority. He has, across the course of the show, demonstrated a knowledge of how the multiverse works that is deep enough and specific enough to make it credible that he had, at some point, noticed the edges. The edges of the curve. The place where the available dimensions stop, or where the filter becomes visible if you are paying attention to the right data. A Rick intelligent enough and curious enough and sufficiently oriented toward the structural features of reality rather than just its contents might have found this. Might have traced the topology of the accessible multiverse and noticed that it had a shape, that it curved back on itself in a particular way, that the set of reachable dimensions was not random but selected. If Rick knew, and the show does not confirm that he did, but does not close the possibility, then his residence inside the curve was a choice. A choice made with full information. The choice to live inside the cage because the cage was familiar and the outside was unknown, and the familiar cage had, after all, his family in it. This reading of Rick is darker than the surface reading, and it is consistent with everything the show has established about him. Rick chooses damage over abandonment repeatedly, in his personal relationships and in his cosmic situation. He stays in situations that hurt him, because the alternative is the unknown, and the unknown is the thing that intelligence cannot process in advance. The curve, if he knew about it, would be a cage he understood. The wider multiverse, the one outside the curve, would be a space where his primary tool for navigating existence, his certainty about his own supremacy, no longer applied. So maybe he stayed. Maybe the smartest being in the curated universe chose the curated universe because it was the one where he won. And being the one who wins was more important than what winning cost him. And then a Morty he once knew, or might have once known, depending on which theory you follow, walked through the wall and took the certainty with him. The Citadel as a social institution is one of the show's most sustained pieces of world building, and it is worth examining as a system rather than just as a setting. What the Citadel reveals, when you look at it as a functioning society, is the specific way in which systems organized around the logic of demonstrated excellence tend to become systems organized around the logic of preserved hierarchy. And the transition between those two things is usually invisible from inside the system. The original premise of Rick's supremacy, the thing that would seem to justify the Citadel's governance structure, is that Rick Sanchez possesses exceptional intelligence and exceptional capability. This is not a false premise. Rick is, in every dimension the show has shown us, genuinely extraordinary. His science is real. His solutions work. His ability to navigate the multiverse, to address threats that would destroy any other being, to produce technologies that should not be possible within the known physics of any single dimension, all of this is demonstrably real within the show's framework. But there is a significant distance between the proposition that Rick is exceptionally capable and the proposition that Rick should therefore govern everyone. The first is an empirical observation. The second is a political conclusion that does not follow automatically from the first. Intelligence is a quality that helps with certain kinds of problems. It does not automatically translate into the right to make decisions for others, or into immunity from the interests of those others, or into the legitimate authority to build a society in your own image and exclude the perspectives of everyone who does not share your defining quality. The Citadel made that leap and then built a civilization on top of it. And the civilization is functional in the sense that it operates, that things get done, that the Ricks are comfortable, and the system perpetuates itself. But it is not just in any way that survives examination. The Mortys exist in a condition of structural subordination that was decided for them by beings who had an obvious interest in the arrangement and who have spent the Citadel's entire existence justifying that interest as objective reality. Evil Morty identified this. He did not just feel it, which every Morty in the Citadel presumably felt in various ways and degrees. He thought about it, which is different. He traced the logic back to its foundations. He found the places where the self-justification is circular and the places where the empirical premises, the ones about Rick's genuine capability, are being used to support conclusions they do not actually support. He built a critique, a real one, not a grievance, but an argument. That argument, the real one that the political speech gestures at, is the philosophical foundation of his entire project. It is the thing that makes his actions, however morally complicated they become in execution, coherent in a way that simple resentment would not be. He is not angry, or not primarily angry. He is correct. And being correct, he does something with that correctness. There is something about the specific quality of patience in Evil Morty's character that deserves extended attention. Because patience of this kind, the kind that spans years and operates across multiple phases of a project without the visible emotional urgency that usually marks investment in something, is rare in the show and rare in fiction generally. And its presence in Evil Morty tells us something important about what he is and how he got there. Most characters who want things want them with an intensity that is visible. The wanting shows. It produces affect, urgency, risk-taking that is disproportionate to the moment. The wanting announces itself. We know what characters want because they demonstrate it through their emotional register as much as through their actions. Evil Morty wants things with an intensity that does not show. The wanting is present, must be present given the scope and duration of what he builds, but it is not in his face or his voice or the speed at which he moves. It is entirely in his actions, and his actions are slow and patient and spread across years in ways that require him to hold the goal in mind through all the intervening noise without letting the noise distract him. This quality is a survival adaptation. It is the specific adaptation of someone who has learned that expressing what you want in an environment that dismisses you is not just ineffective, but dangerous. A Morty who wanted things, who showed that wanting, who made his goals visible in the Citadel's environment, would have had those goals used against him or dismissed entirely. The only way to pursue anything real in a system that does not take you seriously is to not let the system know you are pursuing it. To be invisible. To be unremarkable. To be, in the system's terms, exactly what you are supposed to be, right up until the moment when you are not. Evil Morty learned this, presumably from experience, and applied it with a rigor that is almost inhuman. He was unremarkable, to the Citadel, to the Ricks who governed it, to everyone who might have been watching for threat-level Mortys for years. He was just a Morty. He was in the crowd. He was doing whatever a Morty does. And he was building the curve breaker the entire time. The patience of it is, on reflection, the most Rick-like thing about him. Rick is patient, in ways the show does not always highlight, but that are visible in his best moments. He holds long-term plans. He operates across multiple timescales simultaneously, the immediate adventure and the longer strategic context, and the even longer personal emotional reckoning, all at once. He does not always act in the moment the way a less strategic being would act. He waits for the correct moment, which sometimes means tolerating a great deal in the interim. Evil Morty waited longer than Rick. Waited more patiently. Waited without the insulation of the family and the drinking and the chaos that Rick uses to make the waiting bearable. He just waited. Quietly. Contained. Working. The question of the future is, finally, the most important open question the story leaves us with, and it is worth sitting with rather than resolving in any direction. Evil Morty is in the wider multiverse. The curve is gone. The show has not, in the material produced after the season 5 finale, definitively told us what he does next, or what becomes of the project that consumed his life up to that point. He is somewhere in the infinite, doing something, and the show may or may not return to him in any direct way. What I find most resonant about that open ending is the possibility it implies, but does not state. The possibility that whatever Evil Morty finds outside the curve is not better than what he destroyed in order to get there. The possibility that freedom, in the specific sense of escaping the system that defined you, does not automatically produce the thing that was missing inside the system. That getting out of the cage does not mean you know what to do once you are out. This is the most honest version of the ending. The version where the victory is real, and the liberation is real, and the emptiness on the other side of the liberation is also real. Because the project that gave his life its shape is over. And what fills that shape now is a question he may not have thought to plan for. Or the possibility that he did plan for it. That the wider multiverse contains something specific, something he identified, something he has been building toward in the second phase of a project that the show has not yet disclosed. That the curve was not the destination, but the obstacle, and the destination is something else entirely. Something in the infinite space that the Citadel's wall was blocking access to. Both of these possibilities are live. The show has left room for both. The ending was not a conclusion. It was the end of a chapter. And the next chapter is unwritten. The boy with the eye patch is out there in the wide dark, and the door is closed, and the music has stopped. And whatever comes next has not been decided yet. That incompleteness is not a failure of the story. It is the story acknowledging that the most interesting questions do not have clean endings. We do not know what he does with the wide open nothing. That not knowing is the most honest thing the show could offer. And it is exactly enough. Rick and Morty is a show that has always been more interested in the questions than the answers. Its best episodes do not resolve, they complicate. They take a premise that seems clear and reveal the layers of it that make clarity impossible. And they sit in that impossibility without manufacturing a false simplicity. The Evil Morty arc is the show doing this at the scale of an entire character across an entire series run, and the result is something rare. Most long-running shows cannot sustain a mystery across 4 seasons and then pay it off. The pacing breaks. The audience's memory is imperfect. The pressure to deliver satisfying resolutions at regular intervals erodes the willingness to leave the deepest questions open for years. The show found a way to do it with Evil Morty partly because the character was not the main story, not the thing you were watching week to week, but the shadow at the edge of the main story that you might or might not have noticed. That accumulated meaning quietly and then stepped forward at exactly the right moment. The most remarkable thing about the arc, taken as a whole, is that it does not require the audience to resolve their feelings about Evil Morty in order to appreciate it. You can find him admirable. You can find him frightening. You can find him both simultaneously, which is probably the intended response. You can think that what he did needed to be done and still be troubled by how he did it. You can think the methods were unacceptable and still understand why he used them. The show does not push you toward a verdict. It presents the evidence, and it plays the music, and it lets him walk through the door, and it trusts you to sit with whatever you feel when the door closes. That trust, the trust that the audience can handle ambiguity and does not need to be told how to feel, is the most Rick and Morty thing about the whole arc. The show is, at its core, a show that takes its audience seriously, that believes you can follow a complicated logic without being given a simplified version of it, that believes you can care about a character who is genuinely troubling, that believes the most interesting stories are the ones that do not tell you what to think. Evil Morty is the show's proof of concept for that belief. He is what happens when you build a character with that seriousness and that patience and that trust in the audience over multiple seasons and then let the character do what he was always going to do. He is one of the most interesting characters television has produced in the last decade. He is that for reasons that are unusual and that are worth understanding. Because the reasons are a guide to what ambitious serialized fiction can do when it has the patience and the integrity to follow a question all the way to its end. Which is not, in this case, a conclusion. Which is, in this case, a door. If you made it this far, thank you for spending this much time with a story worth telling carefully. There are few character arcs in animation that reward this kind of attention, and Evil Morty is one of them. Keep the questions open. They are better open. One of the things Rick and Morty does that most science fiction does not do is resist the easy version of its own premise. The easy version of the multiverse, as a narrative device, is infinite possibility as comfort. The multiverse gives characters a way out. If something goes wrong, there is another dimension where it did not. If a character dies, there is a version of them somewhere who is still alive. The infinite variations of the multiverse in this easy version soften the stakes of every individual story, because nothing is truly irreversible when infinite alternatives exist. Rick and Morty starts from the multiverse and ends up somewhere different. In this show, the infinite alternatives do not soften the stakes. They sharpen them, because the specific dimension you are in, the specific version of events you are living, is the only one that counts for the people actually in it. The Rick and Morty of Dimension C-137 cannot comfort themselves with the knowledge that other versions of them are doing better. They are here, in this dimension, with the consequences of the choices they have made, and the infinite alternatives are not available to them in any practical sense. The multiverse is a fact about the structure of reality that provides very little personal consolation. What it does provide, for the people intelligent enough to fully process it, is a specific kind of vertigo. The vertigo that comes from knowing that your life is not uniquely necessary, that there are infinite versions of you living infinite variations of the same situation, that the specific thread of events that produced you and your relationships and your understanding of yourself is one among uncountable others of equal validity. That is not a comfortable thing to know. Most people in the show deal with this discomfort by not thinking about it too hard. Rick deals with it by thinking about it constantly and then armoring against the conclusions. Evil Morty deals with it by thinking about it and acting on the conclusions. The vertigo of the multiverse is, in Evil Morty's case, generative rather than paralyzing. He does not stop at the recognition that his life is one among infinite others. He asks the next question, what is the relationship between those infinite others and the life he actually has? And the answer he finds is the curve, which is the system that has been managing the relationship between his accessible reality and the infinite multiverse in a way that specifically benefits Rick's. The vertigo does not undo him. It orients him. He finds the mechanism and he builds toward breaking it. This is, in the vocabulary the show has established, a very Rick response to an overwhelming situation. Rick's mechanism for dealing with the impossible scale of reality is to find the specific technical lever that changes it, to reduce the cosmic to the operational, to take a problem of staggering philosophical complexity and locate within it the specific physical intervention that makes it tractable. Evil Morty does this with the fundamental injustice of his existence. He finds the lever. He builds the intervention. He pulls. There is a specific kind of intelligence the show attributes to both Rick and Evil Morty that it does not attribute to most of the other characters in its universe, and it is worth naming, because it is the quality that makes both of them simultaneously admirable and disturbing. The quality is the ability to see systems from outside them. Most beings inside a system see the system as the background of their experience, as the given context within which life happens. They can identify individual injustices within the system, individual failures and individual cruelties, but they do not necessarily see the system, as a constructed thing with a history and a logic and an inside and an outside. They inhabit it so completely that its edges are invisible. Rick sees systems from outside. He sees the Galactic Federation as a system, sees its logic and its vulnerabilities, sees how to exploit both. He sees the Citadel as a system, sees what it is built on and what happens when you remove the things it is built on. He sees Earth as a system, sees human society as a particular configuration of particular incentives operating within a particular physical and biological context. This is what makes him dangerous to institutions. He can see them as artifacts rather than as reality. And anything that can be seen as an artifact can be broken. Evil Morty has this quality. He sees the Rick-Morty dynamic as a system. He sees the Citadel as a system. He sees the curve as a system. Each of these things, for the beings inside them, functions as background, as the taken for granted structure within which life happens. For Evil Morty, they are all visible as constructions, as things that were made by beings who had interests and that serve those interests in specific ways and that can therefore be unmade. The difference between Rick and Evil Morty in this shared capacity is what they do with it. Rick sees the systems and mostly declines to dismantle them in any permanent way, partly because dismantling them would require a sustained engagement with the project of dismantling them, and Rick's mode is the adventure rather than the project, the brilliant improvised solution rather than the years-long strategic plan. He is tactical rather than strategic at the level of civilizational change. He breaks things when they are in his way. He does not undertake their systematic removal. Evil Morty is strategic rather than tactical. He does not break the curve when it is in his way. He spends years building the capacity to break the curve and then breaks it at the moment of his choosing. The difference is not intelligence. Both of them are operating at the limit of what the show presents as possible. The difference is orientation. Rick is oriented toward the present moment, the immediate situation, the next adventure. Evil Morty is oriented toward the conclusion, the final state, the world after the change he is committed to making. He is willing to live through many present moments in which the change has not yet happened, carrying the future state in mind, building toward it, waiting. This is the loneliness of strategy that the show understands and does not sentimentalize. To be the person who sees the conclusion and is willing to do what is required to reach it is also to be the person who is not available for the present in the way that the present asks you to be. You are always partly elsewhere, in the future state, in the version of things that has not yet arrived. You are not quite here, not quite with the people who are here, because the project takes up the space that presence would otherwise occupy. Evil Morty has been alone, in this sense, since long before the Season 5 finale. He has been alone since the moment he made the decision to pursue the curve. Everything since then has been in service of that decision, and the decision by its nature required him to not be fully present anywhere, to not give anything the kind of weight that would make it harder to sacrifice when the moment came. He needed to care about nothing enough to lose. The election in Tales from the Citadel has a quality that the show does not make explicit, but that is visible in how it is staged, and that quality is the difference between democratic legitimacy and democratic performance. The distinction matters because it is the thing Evil Morty is exploiting. Democratic legitimacy, in its genuine form, is the idea that governance derives its authority from the genuine expression of the governed population's preferences and interests, and that the governing entity is in some meaningful sense accountable to those preferences and interests. It is not just the mechanism of voting. It is the relationship between the vote and the actual direction of governance, the way in which the expressed preferences of the population shape what happens. Democratic performance is the mechanism of voting without the substance. It is the form of democratic legitimacy, the election and the campaign and the speech and the result, deployed in service of a project that the electorate did not choose and is not being served by. The form is real. The substance is missing. The Citadel, in holding its election, is engaging in democratic performance. The election is real in the sense that votes are cast and counted. It is not real in the sense that the result will produce governance oriented toward the population's actual interests. This would have been true regardless of which candidate won. The Citadel's election is a legitimizing mechanism for power that was going to be exercised regardless, and the election determines only whose hands the power lands in. Evil Morty is playing this game because the game is the only path to the resources he needs. He does not believe in the democratic project of the Citadel. And the show makes this visible through what he does with the presidency once he has it. He is not a traitor to a democratic ideal he once held. He is someone who understood from the beginning that the election was a means and not an end, and who therefore pursued it with the efficiency of someone using a tool rather than the passion of someone believing in a cause. The Mortys who voted for him are not cynics in the same way. They are beings who heard someone describe their situation accurately, and who responded to that accuracy with hope. The hope is real. Evil Morty's willingness to use that real hope as a political instrument without any corresponding commitment to honoring it is the moral center of the character's darkness. Not the murders, though the murders are dark. The willingness to take genuine hope and convert it into votes, and then file the hope away as accomplished political function no longer necessary. There is a thread in the Evil Morty story that connects to something the show has been building about the nature of safety, about what it means to be safe, and what people do in order to be safe, and what they give up in the process of making themselves safe. Rick is not safe. He is, by any objective measure, the opposite of safe. He lives in constant danger, he creates danger, he destroys danger by creating larger danger. But he is also, in a specific emotional sense, the most defended being in the show. His emotional safety measures are extreme. He does not let people in. He does not give anyone enough access to hurt him in the ways that the most serious hurts require proximity. He manages intimacy through chaos, keeping everything around him too noisy and too unstable for the deep quiet in which he could be truly vulnerable. This is a form of safety, a terrible form of safety, one that costs more than it protects, but a form of safety nonetheless. Rick has decided that the way to avoid the worst pain is to never be in the position where the worst pain is possible, to never be that close to anyone, to keep the distance between himself and genuine intimacy filled with adventure and chemistry and comedy and just enough warmth to maintain the attachment without ever letting the attachment become the kind of thing that could destroy him. Evil Morty has a different safety strategy. Where Rick maintains distance through chaos, Evil Morty maintains distance through removal. He does not manage the closeness, he does not keep the attachment at arm's length while pretending to warmth. He simply does not have the attachment. He has, presumably through whatever experience produced him. Decided that the safest position is the one in which there is nothing that can be taken from you. No warmth, no loyalty, no love, nothing that another being can use as leverage. Nothing that can become the mechanism of your control. The irony, which the show does not state but implies through the musical choice at the finale, is that both strategies fail in the same way. Rick is not safe. His chaos does not protect him. The love gets through anyway, for Beth and Summer and Morty, and every time it does, the exposure is painful, and the pain is the thing he was trying to prevent. The chaos is not an adequate barrier. The love finds its way through it. And Evil Morty, walking through the curve into the wider multiverse, alone, free of every attachment he declined to form, is also not safe. Not safe from whatever the wider multiverse contains, which is unknown and therefore cannot be prepared for. Not safe from the specific kind of loss that comes not from having something taken from you, but from having chosen not to have it. The grief of the unlived warmth. The particular loneliness of the person who built the walls so high that nothing could get in, and who is now standing on the other side of the wall, safe, and finding that safety feels like the other thing. The music says this. The show knows this. Evil Morty may or may not know this, because the show does not show us his interior, but the shape of his departure. The way he moves through it, the absence of triumph on his face, suggests that somewhere, in whatever is under the composure, he knows this too. The show that Evil Morty is a part of has a very specific relationship with grief. It is a show about grief, in many ways, though it is also a comedy and also a science fiction adventure and also many other things simultaneously. The grief is the substrate, the thing that everything else grows in. Rick grieves constantly. He grieves the person he was before whatever happened to him, the person who was capable of being fully present and fully warm without the protection of the armor. He grieves the relationships he damaged and the people he lost and the version of his daughter's childhood that did not happen because he was not there. He grieves the universe's indifference, which he understood too young and has never been able to unknow. He grieves with comedy, which is a very specific and very efficient way to grieve. Because comedy keeps moving, and grief that keeps moving never has to stop and be fully felt. Evil Morty's grief, if that is what it is, if there is something underneath the composure that fits that category, is different. It is not performed, and it is not converted into anything. It is not comedy, and it is not chaos, and it is not warmth deployed at the moment when warmth would be appropriate if you were someone who allowed themselves warmth. It is simply absent from the surface. What it is underneath the surface, the show declines to say. But the music. The music at the finale is the show's most honest statement about what it thinks is underneath. The music says, this is the same thing that is in Rick. The same wound. The same knowledge. The same decision, made differently, producing the same result. Two beings who understood love as the mechanism of their destruction and chose, each in their own way, to protect themselves from it, and who are both, despite their different strategies, in the same position in the end. Alone, moving away from the people who could hurt them, free of the specific danger they feared. And not, somehow, safe, that is the Evil Morty story. That is what it has been about. Underneath the multiverse mythology, and the political plot, and the election, and the curve. It has been about the same thing the whole show has been about. What you do when you have been hurt by love, and whether what you do with that hurt makes you safer or just lonelier, and whether those two things, in the end, are actually different. Rick and Morty will continue. The seasons after the 5th have added to the mythology, developed the world further, explored the consequences of the curve's destruction in ways that are still unfolding. The show is still being made, and the questions it started asking are still being asked, and the answers are still, correctly, being deferred in favor of better questions. Evil Morty is out there in the mythology, present as a possibility even in the episodes that do not feature him directly. His existence, and specifically the fact of his absence from the curated multiverse, has changed the conditions in which everything else takes place. The show is different because he walked through that door. The multiverse is different. Rick is operating in a different world than the one he occupied before the 5th season finale, even when the adventures look the same on the surface. This is how the best long-running shows work. The significant events do not just happen and then recede into the past. They change the shape of the ongoing present. They create new conditions. They alter the context in which everything that follows must be understood. Evil Morty did that. He changed the shape of the show's world in a way that is permanent and ongoing, and he did it from the position of least structural power available within the show's mythology. He did it as a Morty. That fact, the position from which he did it, is the thing that makes the arc complete in a way that goes beyond clever plotting. He was supposed to be background. He was supposed to be, in the language of the system he destroyed, unremarkable. He was supposed to be the one whose intelligence does not count. He was supposed to be the buffer, the camouflage, the necessary but forgettable companion in someone else's story. And from that position, with nothing but time and intelligence and the specific patience of someone who has decided what they are going to do, he rewrote the rules of the world. There is something in that which the show does not editorialize. It does not tell you that this is admirable. It does not tell you to feel good about it. It simply shows you that it happened, and lets the fact of it sit. The boy in the yellow shirt. The crowd that looked exactly like him. The expression that was not triumph. The door that opened, and the music. And the wide dark on the other side. That is the entire story, as far as it has been told. The rest is still being written, in whatever dimension he ended up in whatever he is building in the space that has never been mapped. We are waiting to find out what comes next. There is a scene that the show has not written, but that lives in the negative space of everything it has written. A scene that the audience has collectively imagined and debated and constructed out of the available evidence. It is the scene between Evil Morty and his original Rick. The conversation, if there was a conversation, in which something ended. Or the absence of a conversation, which might be worse. The fan theory that places Evil Morty as Rick's original Morty depends on this scene having happened, in one form or another. Either a confrontation or an abandonment. Either a moment of explicit rupture or the slow accumulation of smaller moments that collectively constitute a rupture without any single one being identifiable as the cause. The show has not written this scene. It has not shown us the origin. What it has done, carefully and across many seasons, is show us what the origin produced. And from the production you can work backward toward whatever caused it. The production is a Morty who has no functional loyalty to any Rick, who understands Rick-level intelligence from the inside, who has the specific quality of someone who once loved something fully and then decided that the love was the wrong move. Not because the feeling was false, but because the feeling was used. Someone took the love and used it as a lever, and the lever moved him in directions he did not choose, and at some point he noticed the lever. And at that point, everything changed. This is not a reading the show imposes. It is a reading the show makes available, carefully, through the character's behavior and the gaps in his history and the specific quality of his relationship to the concept of Rick, which is not hatred, not quite, but something colder and more structural than hatred. He does not hate Ricks. He recognizes them. He understands their logic from the inside. He knows exactly how they think and why they do what they do and what they tell themselves about what they do. And he has, from that understanding, built a system for dealing with them that does not involve any of the things that got him into trouble the first time. The thing that got him into trouble the first time was caring. He cared about a Rick, and the caring made him available in ways that were exploited, so he stopped. Not quickly, probably, not without cost, but stopped. The scene the show has not written is the scene where he stopped. Where the decision was made. Where whatever was happening long enough and in ways serious enough that the love, which was real, became the last casualty of the relationship rather than the thing that survived it. We do not get to see that scene. The show keeps it from us, which is, as I have said before, a form of respect. The wound is his. It is not spectacle. The show's co-creator Dan Harmon has spoken in interviews about the emotional architecture of Rick as a character, about the idea that Rick's detachment is not cynicism, but self-protection. That the nihilism is defensive rather than genuine. That somewhere inside the man who claims not to care is a person who cares enormously and has been badly hurt by caring. This framing of Rick is present in the show itself, confirmed across multiple seasons, and it is the framing that makes Evil Morty's parallel to Rick so precisely calibrated. Because Evil Morty is, in this framing, not the opposite of Rick. He is Rick without the residual warmth. Rick with the self-protection completed. Rick at the endpoint of the journey that Rick is still in the middle of. Rick is still in the middle of the journey because he still has the family. He still comes home. He still bursts with something that looks like pride when Morty does something good, and something that looks like panic when Morty is in danger. The warmth is still there, operating under the armor, leaking through the cracks. The self-protection is not total. Evil Morty's is. Or, the show presents it as total, which amounts to the same thing within the story's terms. Whether there is warmth somewhere under his composure that has simply been made inaccessible, or whether the warmth has genuinely been extinguished. The functional result is the same. He does not act from warmth. He does not make decisions on the basis of what he feels for specific beings. He acts from strategy, from the logic of the project, from the conclusions of a long analysis of his situation. This is what Rick would be if he finished the journey he is on. If the family was removed, or lost, or given up. If the last attachments were severed, or chosen not to be maintained. If the armor went all the way down. Evil Morty is the warning at the end of Rick's road. The show knows this. The music confirms it. And it keeps building the story anyway, keeps asking you to look at both characters and hold them in relation to each other. Keeps insisting that you understand them as versions of the same thing rather than as opposites. Something should be said about the eye patch, because it is the most visible symbol the show gives Evil Morty, and it has attracted considerable attention from fans trying to interpret its significance. The obvious function of the eye patch is identification. It distinguishes Evil Morty from other Mortys in a visual shorthand that works immediately. In a show where many characters look similar, any distinctive visual feature becomes load-bearing, and the eye patch does its job efficiently. Once you have seen it, you know who you are looking at. But the eye patch is also doing something else. Something that the show does not explicitly address, but that the visual language implies. An eye patch suggests an injury. It suggests a loss of something that should be there. One eye where two should be, one perspective where binocular vision requires both. The eye patch marks its wearer as someone who has survived something that cost them a part of their capacity to see. In the context of Evil Morty's history, the injury implication is meaningful. He has been hurt. Something happened to him that took something away, that reduced his capacity, that cost him something he should have kept. The eye patch is sitting on his face as a permanent marker of that cost. Not hidden, not compensated for, not pretended away. Just there, part of how he presents himself to the world. This is different from Rick's coping mechanisms, which are mostly about concealment. Rick hides the damage. He makes it invisible through noise and chaos and the performance of not caring. The damage is present, but it is buried. If you met Rick without knowing anything about him, you might not immediately know that he was carrying what he is carrying. With Evil Morty, the evidence of the damage is on his face. Not narrated, not confessed, not explained. Just there. The eye patch says, something happened. The composure says, I made something from it. The combination is the character. Tales from the Citadel, as an episode, is doing something that the show does not do in quite this way anywhere else. It is making the Citadel's social structure legible through character experience, which is the most effective way to make institutional critique accessible without making it feel like a lecture. The 4 storylines in the episode are each designed to illuminate a different tier of the Citadel's hierarchy and a different relationship to the injustice of that hierarchy. The cop Rick and his Morty partner illuminate the enforcement apparatus and the way it serves the hierarchy rather than justice in any universal sense. The factory Morty illuminates the labor structure and the way mobility within the hierarchy is structured to feel possible without being genuinely available. The businessman Morty illuminates the upper tier and the specific compromises required to occupy it as a Morty rather than a Rick. The broken Rick illuminates the end state, what the system produces when its subjects run its logic all the way to the conclusion. None of these characters is Evil Morty, but all of them are building context for him. They are the world he came from, the world he is about to change, the world whose logic he understood well enough to find its foundations and remove them. Each of their stories is, from his perspective, data, evidence of the system's structure. The factory Morty's aspiration and the system's betrayal of that aspiration is exactly the kind of evidence Evil Morty has been collecting. The cop Morty's dawning understanding of what he is actually doing when he enforces the Citadel's rules is exactly the kind of consciousness shift that Evil Morty is, in his speech, deliberately trying to catalyze. He is not performing these storylines for our benefit. He is performing a political project that these storylines are evidence of. The audience gets to see the evidence laid out clearly. The episode is structured to make us understand why Evil Morty wins, not just as a narrative outcome, but as a logical consequence of what the Citadel actually is. He wins because the Mortys he addressed have lives that his speech accurately described. The accuracy is the persuasion. The truth is the campaign. There are shows that produce a character this good once in their run, if they are lucky, and it happens because a set of conditions aligned correctly. The show had developed its mythology carefully enough that the character could be rooted in it. The writers understood what they wanted to say well enough that the character could say it without being didactic. The character was given enough time, spread across enough seasons that the audience could develop a real relationship with the questions he embodies rather than just the plot mechanics of his appearances. And the emotional architecture of the show. The foundation of Rick and Morty as a story about intelligence and damage and love was strong enough to support the weight of everything evil Morty represents. These conditions do not often align. Most shows that have something to say it too quickly, or do not trust the audience to receive it without guidance, or do not give the character enough time to accumulate the weight the story requires them to carry. The evil Morty arc works because every one of these conditions was met. The mythology was there. The emotional architecture was there. The time was taken. The trust was extended. The result is a character who is still generating conversation years after his most significant appearances, whose story is not finished and whose questions are not closed, who sits in the cultural landscape of the show as an unresolved presence rather than a completed chapter. He is still out there. The show has not called him back, but it has not foreclosed the possibility. And the presence of that unclosed door is part of what keeps the character alive in the audience's imagination. He is waiting somewhere in the wider multiverse for the next chapter of his story to be written. And whatever that chapter turns out to be, the foundation laid across seasons 1 through 5 is strong enough to support it. Whatever he does next will make sense in the context of what he has already done. The character is coherent. The arc is coherent. The questions it asks are coherent and real and have not gone away. That is rarer than it should be. It is worth naming. It is worth, on a quiet evening when you are settling in and letting the voice take you somewhere, spending time with. The boy with the eye patch. The crowd of his own face. The music at the end. The entire story as far as we have it. The wider context of what Rick and Morty has been since its premiere is relevant here, because evil Morty does not exist outside the show's cultural moment. He exists inside it, and the show's cultural moment has been a specific and unusual one. Rick and Morty arrived at a time when the culture was particularly receptive to the kind of intelligence as identity formation that Rick Sanchez represents. The early seasons coincided with a period in which a certain model of cynical, high intelligence, low empathy engagement with the world was being celebrated in parts of the culture in ways that were worth examining. Rick was loved partly for his genius and partly for his contempt, and the contempt was, in some audiences, the more attractive quality. The show was aware of this and was, from relatively early on, engaged in a subtle critique of its own most enthusiastic reception. Rick's contempt is not presented as correct. It is presented as a coping mechanism, as damage, as the specific way in which a person who is genuinely extraordinary has failed to translate that exceptionality into a good life, or good relationships, or good anything in the personal sense. The show loves Rick, and the show also makes it consistently clear that Rick is not a role model, that emulating Rick's contempt without Rick's underlying love would produce something worse than Rick. Evil Morty is, from this angle, the show's sharpest statement on the misreading. He is what happens when the contempt is adopted without the warmth, when the intelligence is retained and the care is removed. When the lesson taken from Rick is not that intelligence and love can coexist in a complicated and messy and real way, but that intelligence is sufficient, and love is a vulnerability. He is the version of Rick that a certain audience was celebrating, taken to its conclusion. And the conclusion is not triumphant. It is not the victory condition. The conclusion is a boy walking through a door alone into the unknown with the music of loss playing over him, having destroyed everything he set out to destroy and built nothing in its place, free of every attachment he protected himself from having, technically victorious and privately arriving perhaps at the specific grief of the fully defended. The show built this character partly in response to its own cultural moment, partly as a correction to the misreading, partly as an honest examination of where the path the misreaders were celebrating actually leads. It leads to the wide dark. It leads to the door and the music and the face that is not triumph. That is the show's clearest and most sustained piece of moral argument, delivered not through a lesson or a speech, but through a character who embodies the argument at the level of every choice he makes. Evil Morty is not a warning delivered from outside. He is the warning lived from the inside, by someone who is too intelligent not to know what he is doing and too committed to the project to stop. The patience with which the show built him is the patience of a piece of storytelling that trusts its own argument. It did not need to rush. It did not need to state the thesis. It built the character carefully enough that the thesis is visible in the character, in the way they move and speak and are still